The afternoon sun burned gold over the private runway, casting a shimmer on the polished silver jet parked at the edge of the exclusive terminal. The plane wasn't just expensive, it was elite. Its design sleek, its engines quiet, and its cabin outfitted with the kind of luxury that made even the ultra-wealthy feel like royalty. Inside the terminal, passengers sipped rare champagne and scrolled casually through their phones. Their clothes were designer, their conversations hushed, measured. Everyone in that lounge belonged to a different world, the kind where last names opened doors and bank balances stretched into the hundreds of millions. A gentle voice over the intercom announced boarding. One by one they rose, an orderly procession of privilege, and made their way to the aircraft, waiting like a chariot beyond the tinted glass. Lauren, the lead flight attendant, stood at the entrance of the plane. Her uniform was flawless, navy blue with gold accents, sharply pressed, hugging her form with precision. Her blonde hair was tucked into a neat bun, her makeup subtle but immaculate. Every part of her look said professional, poised, perfect. Her smile, however, changed depending on who approached. To the tall, sharply dressed man in a Tom Ford suit, she beamed, "Welcome aboard, Mr. Sterling." To the elegant woman in the red Valentino dress, she added a gentle compliment. "Gorgeous dress. Paris?" To others, a polite nod. Then he came. He was slow in his steps, but there was no weakness in his posture. His back was straight, his gait steady. He wore a long, white thobe, pressed and pristine, and a red and white keffiyeh wrapped neatly around his head, held in place by a black agal. His sandals were simple, his leather satchel worn from use. His beard was white and neatly trimmed, and his eyes, deep, dark, ancient, took in everything with quiet observance. Lauren's smile faltered. She blinked once, twice. "Excuse me, sir," she said, stepping forward with a hint of firmness in her tone. "Are you with one of the passengers?" The old man paused. His voice was soft, gentle, marked by a subtle Arabic accent. "I am a passenger." She looked him over, unconvinced. "May I see your boarding pass?" He opened his satchel with careful movements and withdrew a single item, a thick, black boarding card edged with gold. Engraved on the surface in bold print was a single detail, SEAT1A. Lauren hesitated. That seat was always reserved for VIPs, real ones, CEOs, heads of state, billionaires. She forced a smile. "Right this way," she said, voice clipped. No warmth, no welcome. The old man offered a quiet nod and stepped inside the plane. The other passengers barely noticed. Most were busy settling in, checking emails, adjusting recliners. But a few eyes did flick toward him, some with curiosity, others with confusion, one or two with amusement. He made his way to the front of the plane and sat in 1A, right beside the massive panoramic window. He placed his satchel on his lap and folded his hands calmly. Lauren glanced at him once more before moving down the aisle, her lips tight. A few rows behind, a young man in designer streetwear leaned toward his girlfriend, whispering, "Yo, who invited the Desert Prince?" She giggled, barely looking up from her phone. "Maybe it's a genie convention." They laughed louder than they should have. The old man didn't react. Near the back, a middle-aged woman in pearls frowned slightly and whispered to her husband, "Strange. I thought this was an invite-only flight." "Probably a clerical error," he replied. "Someone always slips through the cracks." The old man sat in stillness, his eyes drifting out the window, the noise behind him nothing more than background static. The pilot passed by briefly to check the cabin. When his eyes landed on 1A, he paused. There was a flicker of recognition. He bowed his head slightly, murmured something under his breath, Arabic perhaps, and moved on. Lauren saw the interaction and stiffened. She approached the pilot a moment later. "Captain," she said under her breath, "do you know him?" The pilot offered only a short glance. "Just do your job, Lauren. Please." Then he disappeared into the cockpit. The engines began to hum. As the plane lifted into the sky, the cabin dipped into quiet luxury. Some passengers scrolled through stock portfolios. Others accepted glasses of champagne. A few slipped on silk eye masks and reclined into sleep. The old man pulled out a small string of prayer beads, rolled them slowly between his fingers, and closed his eyes. Lauren passed by with the drinks cart. She slowed slightly when she reached him. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked, voice stiff. He opened his eyes and smiled gently. "Just water, please." She handed him the bottle without a word and turned away. Moments later, she stopped by the seat behind him. A young influencer, heavily made up and dripping in designer accessories, wrinkled her nose. "Is that perfume?" she asked, motioning toward the front. Lauren followed her gaze and shook her head. "I think it's just incense or something. Some kind of religious thing." The influencer rolled her eyes. It's giving weird, the man behind her snorted. It's giving camel rides. More laughter. Lauren didn't correct them. She smiled along. The old man remained motionless. He continued his silent prayer. Half an hour passed. The plane cruised steadily through the clouds. A few passengers had dozed off. A soft Arabic oud instrumental played in the background. The scent of roasted nuts and lemon water lingered in the cabin air. Then Lauren returned. She stood in front of the old man, arms folded. "I'm sorry," she said flatly, "but I need to verify your identity again." The old man looked up. "I already showed you my card," he replied calmly. "Right, but we've had some issues in the past," she said, voice slightly louder. "Sometimes guests sneak into first class. You understand?" Several heads turned. "I am not a guest," he said, still calm. "I am a passenger." Lauren's tone turned sharp. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one last time. If you cannot provide verified documentation, I will have to report this." The cabin went still. Even the influencer stopped scrolling. The old man slowly reached into his satchel, pulled out his passport, and handed it over. Lauren looked at it, puzzled. Green. Arabic text. A country she didn't immediately recognize. She squinted at the name. A long one. Regal sounding, but unfamiliar. She handed it back. "This doesn't explain anything." He said nothing. Lauren straightened. "Then I'll be contacting security when we land. Until then, I need you to move to the back of the aircraft." The air turned cold. Everyone was watching now. The old man met her eyes. "I paid for this seat," he said simply. "I will remain here." Lauren's voice rose. "I'm going to ask you one last time. Move to the back of the plane, or I will call security." Her voice echoed. Loud, sharp, condescending. The man didn't move. He looked up at her, eyes calm, and said just one word. "No." A few gasps rippled through the cabin. Lauren's hand trembled at her side. Then suddenly, without warning, she slapped him. A harsh, dry sound. Skin against skin. Time froze. The old man didn't flinch. He didn't cry out. He didn't even raise a hand to his cheek. He just stared at her. And then, softly, he reached into his satchel once more and pulled out a phone. Sleek, platinum, custom. He dialed one number, put it to his ear, and spoke. "This is Sheikh Ibrahim al-Rashid. Please inform the crew of my aircraft that I am currently being assaulted in my own plane." The silence was instant and suffocating. Lauren went pale. Several passengers gasped. The pilot's door creaked open. A junior flight attendant rushed in from the galley, face white. "Sir," she whispered breathlessly, we didn't know." The old man stood up slowly. No anger, no rage, just profound disappointment. "You judged me by my clothes, my silence, my faith," he said, voice like velvet and steel. Lauren's lips moved, but no words came out. He turned to the rest of the cabin. "I built this airline from the ground up. Every seat, every glass, every detail, mine. And yet, today, I was treated like dirt, not because of who I am, but because of what you thought I wasn't." No one could speak, not even Vaughn, who had sat quietly the whole flight, now visibly sweating. The old man looked to the pilot. "Turn us around. There will be changes." The pilot nodded, without hesitation, and the old man sat back down in seat 1A, with the dignity of a king. The hum of the engines continued, steady as ever, but the atmosphere in the plane had shifted completely. The same plush interior now felt stifling, suffocated by silence and tension. Every pair of eyes was locked on the man in seat 1A, the quiet, humble figure they had all dismissed, who now sat with effortless composure, while the world around him unraveled. Lauren stood frozen, her hand still trembling from the slap she had delivered only moments before. The echo of that contact hadn't faded, not in sound, not in spirit. She looked pale, disoriented, as though she had just awoken from a dream to realize she was trapped in a nightmare of her own making. The other flight attendants gathered near the front, whispering furiously. One of them, a younger woman named Tessa, dared to step forward. She leaned down next to Lauren and whispered under her breath, "You need to apologize. Now!" Lauren's jaw clenched. "I didn't know who he was." "That's not the point," Tessa hissed. "You hit a passenger." Lauren looked like she wanted to argue, to explain, to justify, but the words never came. Her mouth opened, then shut, and then she turned slowly toward the old man once more. He hadn't moved. He sat with the stillness of someone who had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. Lauren stepped forward, trying to find her voice. "Sir, I didn't mean to offend you. I didn't realize..." "Didn't realize what?" came the quiet reply. He didn't even raise his voice, but it cut through the cabin like a blade. Every whisper died instantly. "That I wasn't rich enough to sit here? That I didn't dress the part? That I prayed too quietly for your liking?" Lauren blinked. I was doing my job. No, he said, and there was no kindness in the word. You were playing gatekeeper. You thought you knew who belonged, and who didn't. She flinched. Behind him, the influencer who had laughed earlier slowly slid down in her seat, trying to appear invisible. The man beside her took off his sunglasses, ashamed to meet anyone's eyes. The old man leaned forward slightly, still addressing Lauren, but speaking now for the entire plane to hear. I didn't come here to humiliate you, he said. I came here for peace, but when peace is met with prejudice, silence becomes complicity. So no, I won't be silent. The flight deck door opened. The captain, a man in his 50s with steel gray hair and a military posture, stepped into the cabin. Your Highness, he said with a respectful nod. The words dropped into the cabin like thunder. Your Highness. Several passengers gasped. A woman audibly whispered, He's royalty? Lauren stumbled back half a step. Her knees were shaking now. The old man didn't look at the captain. He just said calmly, You may continue toward our destination, but upon landing there will be personnel waiting. This cabin, this crew, this entire airline will answer for today. The captain nodded and returned to the cockpit, and still the man in seat 1A never raised his voice. Time passed slowly. No one slept. The passengers who once strutted confidently now avoided eye contact, suddenly humbled. The body language had shifted, shoulders hunched, heads bowed. The once chatty influencer was now deathly silent. Even Daniel Vaughn, who had built empires, kept to himself, as if afraid his proximity to the old man might somehow burn. Lauren, meanwhile, sat in the crew station near the galley, staring at her hands. Her palms were red, her breathing uneven. Tessa approached her again, this time with a cup of water. Do you want me to finish your shift? She asked gently. Lauren looked up, eyes wide. I'm getting fired, aren't I? Tessa didn't answer. She didn't need to. The turbulence outside was mild, but inside the plane, every moment felt like a storm. No one dared speak above a whisper. The man in 1A, however, sat perfectly still. His eyes occasionally drifted to the clouds beyond the window. His fingers returned to his prayer beads. He was content, or maybe something deeper than that. Centered. The very man who had been mocked and humiliated an hour earlier was now the unspoken gravity of the plane. Everything orbited around him. Then a soft voice broke the tension. Excuse me, said Mrs. Raymond. The old man turned slightly to see the silver-haired woman standing beside him, her knitting needles tucked away in her handbag. I just wanted to say, she continued, that I was wrong to make assumptions, and I am very, very sorry. Her husband rose too, nodding. It won't mean much, sir, but I apologize as well. You didn't deserve any of this. The old man smiled faintly. Thank you. Slowly, others followed. The man in the Balenciaga hoodie stood, face flushed. Look, I said some messed up stuff. I was stupid. I didn't know who you were, but even if you were nobody, I was still wrong. I'm sorry, man. The influencer looked up from her seat, mascara smudged. I judged you. I laughed at you, and I feel awful. One by one, they apologized. The plane that had once looked at him with suspicion now looked at him with reverence. Not because he was rich, not because he was royalty, but because they had seen who he was when it mattered, and they had failed. Only Lauren had yet to speak. She finally stood, walking back toward the front. She faced him, lips quivering. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said. I disrespected you, I assaulted you, and I humiliated myself in front of everyone. She looked him in the eye. But the truth is, I think I hated what I didn't understand, and I'm sorry for that, truly. There was silence again, a long one. Then the old man nodded. Your apology is accepted, he said simply. Her eyes welled up. But, he continued, there will still be consequences. Not because I seek revenge, but because change only comes through accountability. She nodded. I understand. And with that, she turned away, walking slowly back to the galley, shoulders heavy, but somehow relieved. There was no more pretending now, only truth. The remainder of the flight passed without incident. As the plane descended through the clouds and prepared to land, the old man looked out at the skyline of the city below, towers rising from the earth like ambition made real, lights blinking, streets winding, a future always in motion. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated upon landing. We will be receiving special protocol clearance for one of our guests. The plane touched down like a whisper. When it rolled to a stop, a line of black cars was already waiting on the tarmac, accompanied by uniformed guards and sharply dressed assistants. The plane door opened, and for the first time in hours, the old man rose. The silence returned. He picked up his satchel, adjusted his keffiyeh, and turned toward the door. Before stepping out, he paused. Then he turned back to the passengers. "I leave you with this," he said. "May your eyes always look deeper than skin. May your hearts weigh truth, not titles. And may your judgments be as gentle as your hopes." And with that, he stepped onto the staircase and descended into the waiting cars. The passengers remained frozen. Nobody dared move. It was Tessa, the junior flight attendant, who finally whispered, "He wasn't just rich." Mrs. Raymond completed the thought. He was righteous, and no one on that flight would ever forget the lesson they had learned. Not from a speech, not from a punishment, but from a man who never raised his voice, never shouted, never begged to be respected. He simply was, and in the end, that was enough to make them all realize who they really were. The black cars had long vanished down the private runway, a blur of diplomatic license plates, tinted windows, and quiet efficiency. The jet, once so full of pride and pretense, now felt ghost-like in its silence, as if the departure of that one man had drained it of all its illusion. Lauren sat alone in the crew lounge after landing, her crisp uniform wrinkled, her mind unraveling at the seams. The entire terminal seemed quieter than usual, the opulence of the private airport doing nothing to soothe the panic simmering beneath her skin. She clutched her tablet in both hands. A flashing red light blinked on the screen, a direct communication from the airline's corporate headquarters. "Urgent internal incident review. Imminent. Prepare statement. Compliance officers en route." Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't a slap-on-the-wrist situation anymore. This was global, viral, serious. She knew it, and more importantly, he knew it. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the man known to the public only as Sheikh Idris Al-Najjar walked through the marble-floored atrium of the Al-Najjar International Holdings Tower, flanked by his advisors. The tall glass skyscraper bore his name, but very few ever associated it with him. The press rarely caught his face. His net worth was speculated in billions, but he refused interviews, rarely attended galas, and preferred his quiet, charitable endeavors over red carpets. But today was different. Today, silence wouldn't suffice. He stepped into the private executive suite. On a large, curved screen, his legal team had pulled up multiple news articles, surveillance footage, and passenger social media videos. The scene was spreading like wildfire. Billionaire on board was trending. So was number flight shame and number prejudice in first class. "CNN is calling," one of the assistants said, "and BBC and Al Jazeera." Idris held up a hand. "I will speak to no press," he said firmly. "The truth speaks loudest when it isn't yelled." He turned to his head of operations. "Begin a formal review of the airline. All contracts with them are frozen until further notice. And find me the name of the woman, the attendant." "She's already been identified, sir. Lauren Mercer." He nodded. "Invite her." A pause. "Personally? Yes," he said. "Not to punish, but to teach." Back at the airport, Lauren had barely finished drafting her third apology email when she was summoned. Not by her supervisor, not by the company, but by a formal representative of Al-Najjar Holdings, bearing a gold-trimmed envelope and an unexpected message. "Mr. Idris Al-Najjar requests your presence at his corporate headquarters for a private meeting. Transportation has been arranged." Lauren stared at the letter. Private meeting? She wanted to run, hide, escape this spiral before it swallowed her whole. But deep down, she knew something more than her job was on the line. This was about her integrity, her biases, her humanity, and there was no dodging that kind of reckoning. The car that picked her up was silent inside, a luxury vehicle with tinted windows and cold bottled water tucked neatly into the seat back. The driver said nothing, didn't even glance at her. Lauren fidgeted with the hem of her jacket, nerves coiling tighter the closer they drew to the tower. When they arrived, the sleek glass doors opened before her, the concierge offering her no judgment, no warmth, only a gentle, respectful nod. She was escorted to a private elevator. At the very top floor, Idris was waiting. No security, no lawyers, just him. He stood by the window, hands behind his back, looking out over the skyline like a king surveying not his land, but his people. "Ms. Mercer," he said without turning. She stepped in, heels clicking awkwardly across the polished floor. "Sir, I didn't expect that I would call you here," he asked, finally turning to face her. She nodded. Her mouth went dry. "Would you rather I had sued you?" he asked calmly. "Cost you your job, your pension, your name?" "No. I mean, I know I deserve it. I was wrong," he said, his voice firm but not cruel. "Yes, you were." She swallowed hard. "I've spent the last 12 hours replaying it over and over. I still don't know why I did it. I thought maybe you were a threat. Maybe I felt like I was keeping order. But deep down," he let her struggle, then finally offered. Deep down, you didn't see me. She blinked. You saw a stereotype, he said. Not a man. You saw a threat, not a passenger. You saw a prayer, not peace. Tears stung her eyes. I wasn't raised like that, she said softly, but somehow I became that. I don't know how I got here. He approached her now, not menacingly, not with anger, but with an air of truth that could not be denied. Then let's find out together. She looked up at him, confused. I want you to come with me, he said, to see what you could not see on that plane. I want you to see where I come from, how I live, what I believe, not because I owe it to you, but because you owe it to yourself. Lauren couldn't believe what she was hearing. You want me to travel with you? He nodded. I want you to meet the people you feared, the places you judged, the faith you misunderstood, and then maybe you'll understand the harm a single slap can cause, not just to a person's face, but to a world's perception. She could hardly speak. But why? He offered a small smile. Because sometimes the greatest justice is education. Days later, Lauren boarded another jet. This time she wasn't a crew member. She was a student, a passenger, a guest. She sat in a soft leather seat beside Idris, who offered her tea, not judgment. She watched as his staff treated her not like a fallen figure, but someone worthy of redemption. They flew to Dubai first, where Idris showed her the schools he funded, where children of all backgrounds learned side by side. Then to Cairo, where he took her to a quiet mosque, explaining the beauty and discipline of prayer, the meaning of submission, not to men, but to something greater. In Amman, she met women entrepreneurs funded by Idris's foundation, powerful, articulate, groundbreaking, so far from the image she'd once painted in her mind. And everywhere they went, Idris never once brought up the slap. He didn't have to. Her guilt traveled with her like a shadow, but so did growth. It was on the final leg of their journey, flying back toward New York, that Lauren finally turned to him, eyes red-rimmed from tears but clear with purpose. I want to do something, she said. He looked at her curiously. I want to speak, publicly, about what I did, about what I learned, not to clear my name, but to help others not make the same mistake. He nodded slowly. That, he said, would be a beginning. Back in New York, Lauren stood on a stage at a private equity conference where Idris was the keynote speaker. She had been given 5 minutes. She didn't use notes. I used to think racism was something loud, she said into the mic. Slurs, violence, protests. But sometimes it's silent. It wears a uniform. It smiles politely. It speaks with authority. She paused. I slapped a man who did nothing wrong, because I judged him before I knew him. I saw his skin, his clothes, his prayer beads, and thought they meant danger. Gasps. Cameras flashing. She took a breath. But that man gave me something I didn't deserve. A second chance. Not just to apologize, but to see the world through a different lens. I'll never be able to undo what I did, but I hope, in sharing this, I can prevent someone else from making the same mistake. And as she stepped down, the room rose in silent, solemn applause, not for her redemption, but for the truth. In the front row, Idris nodded once. He had never asked for revenge, only for the world to see what he had known all along, that dignity doesn't wear a label, and power doesn't need to shout. 6 months later, the world had moved on, as it always does. News cycles shifted, hashtags faded, and the slap that once ignited 1,000 headlines became a footnote in a year of turbulence. But not for Lauren Mercer. She'd left the airline shortly after her public apology, not because they fired her, but because she couldn't walk those aisles without hearing the echo of her own mistake. In its place, she found herself on a path she hadn't expected, speaking, writing, and most importantly, listening. She had been invited to schools, universities, and corporate conferences. People didn't come to judge. They came to learn, not about the billionaire, but about the bias, the assumptions, the silent prejudices we carry until someone forces us to look closer. And as for Idris al-Najjar, he disappeared again into the quiet. No press statements, no Instagram selfies, no grand interviews or late-night exclusives. He returned to what he'd always done, building, healing, giving. But what no one knew, what Lauren still didn't know, was that the slap that brought the world to its knees had also set in motion something far greater, a storm that hadn't yet broken, and it would all begin with an invitation. It arrived in the spring, a white envelope, no return address, no logo, just her name, written in a hand so elegant it could have been engraved. Inside a single sheet of linen paper. You've walked through guilt, now walk through legacy. Come. No cameras, no stage, no name tag, just truth. A private jet awaited, not a commercial airline. A sleek, black aircraft with no markings, silent as shadow. Lauren almost didn't go, but something in her gut, in her soul, told her this was not a request. It was a summons. The plane touched down not in a capital city or a luxury resort, but in a sprawling desert estate nestled between ancient sands and modern miracles, somewhere in the Middle East, though no coordinates were shared. As she stepped out, she was greeted not by bodyguards, but children, smiling, barefoot, carrying bowls of dates and honey water. They led her to a marble courtyard filled with shade trees and breeze-cooled air, and there, seated beneath a towering olive tree, was Idris. He looked older somehow, not in years, but in weight, as if the world had pressed more into him since they last met. "You came," he said. "I had to." He smiled. "Then come. There's something you must see." He led her through the estate. It wasn't what she expected. Yes, there were pillars and fountains and gardens that stretched to the horizon, but that wasn't the point. He took her into a room lined with portraits, but not of royalty, not of himself. They were pictures of women, children, refugees, activists, scientists, teachers. Every frame had a plaque beneath it. Lauren read one. Dr. Rana Al-Masri, discovered life-saving compound for autoimmune diseases. Sponsored 1999. Another, Fatima Qureshi, founded first all-girls STEM school in rural Afghanistan. Funded 2003. "These are the legacies I've built," Idris said. "Not towers, not wealth, but futures." Lauren turned to him. "Why are you showing me this?" He walked to the center of the hall and placed his hand on a covered frame. "You remember what you asked me in Cairo? Why I didn't destroy you?" She nodded. "I said justice is education, but I left out the second part." He pulled back the cloth. The frame revealed a portrait of Lauren Mercer, standing before a group of students, hands raised in mid-speech. The date beneath it read, "Lauren Mercer, Catalyst, Witness, Bridge." "I didn't just forgive you," he said softly. "I invested in you." Her throat tightened. "I don't deserve this." "No," he agreed. "You don't. But none of us deserve grace. That's why it's powerful." She turned away, tears brimming. Idris approached her. "You thought this journey was about me. It never was. It was about you. About what one moment of cruelty can destroy, and what one moment of clarity can rebuild." She looked up at him. "What now?" He walked her to a door she hadn't noticed before. It opened into a large room, sleek, modern, with digital displays and maps and charts. "Welcome to the Haven Project," he said. "A global initiative against racial profiling and bias. Run by the very people who lived it. Survivors, reformed officers, activists, educators." She stepped in, breath catching. Dozens of young people worked inside, monitoring systems, coordinating outreach, training modules, policy reform, and on one screen, her face, from the video that went viral, captioned simply, "The moment everything changed. I want you to lead the Western Division," Idris said quietly. "Not as punishment, but as purpose." Lauren couldn't speak. The weight of it was overwhelming, but somehow, exactly right. She nodded, wiping a tear. "I will," he smiled. "Then we begin." Months later, the Haven Project rolled out its first curriculum, a training program that would soon be adopted by airports, police departments, hospitals, and schools across 5 continents. The slap that once humiliated a man had become the catalyst for a global shift. And while Idris remained as quiet as ever in the public eye, he watched the world change, not through laws or war or wealth, but through redemption. 1 year to the day after the incident, Lauren stood at a conference of world leaders and educators, introducing the Haven Project. No one laughed, no one scoffed. They listened. When the event ended, a man in traditional Arab dress approached her quietly. "My mother watched your video," he said, eyes shining. "It gave her hope. For me. For my children. Thank you." Lauren smiled. "The thanks belongs to someone far wiser than me." And somewhere, far away, Idris watched the broadcast on a quiet screen, alone in his study. The same beads he once held on that fateful flight still rested in his palm. He whispered a prayer, not for justice, but for mercy, because in the end, the most powerful man on the plane wasn't the billionaire. It was the man who never raised his voice, never revealed his name, and still changed the world.